Welcome back to Dickin' Around Outdoors. A little bit ago, we did a video explaining why we chose to have a look at the Rigel 35 from Travoca. This is a 12-volt portable e-cooler, they call it, but it's a compressor refrigerator. And we thought it had some really nice features and it's got a cool vibe to the looks. For the most part, it has done or performed as we expected. But there's one dark cloud over this refrigerator, and it is a big storm cloud. And it's something that you need to know if you are considering this unit, or more importantly, if you have this unit and you're currently using it for camping. And we're going to get to that. But first, let me tell you why we wanted to test this unit. So for $750, it comes packed with some pretty nice features, one of which is the vacuum insulated panel insulation, so it's not just blowing in foam. That's very nice. The other thing is it uses a Toshiba compressor, which although not well known in the overland fridge market, is a well-known and well-respected compressor brand in the refrigeration market. So we thought that Travoca's decision to use that compressor would make for an interesting comparison with some other refrigerators. If you want to see our full rationale about why we chose this, I'm just going to put that video up here. The way we're going to do this today is I'm going to explain the testing that I've done on it to date. That's what we're going to talk about today. How we did our testing, what our results were, what we found that worked, what we found that we didn't like so much, and there's very few of those. But the one thing that really you need to know. So, let's get started. So what I see mostly on refrigerator reviews on YouTube is basically folks that have gotten a unit and they just want to show you what the features are, kind of talk about their use case, and then put a link below. And that's not how we do it on this channel. We really want to test things, because if we're going to take this with us and we're going to rely on it in some pretty remote areas, we want to make sure that it is going to work. And one thing about this unit, it is a dual zone unit. So we did testing in both configurations. So if you take out the panel, you have one large area in the fridge, and that area we would intend, or our intention was primarily to use this as a refrigerator, probably not using the freezer as much. If you put the panel back in, you have a small freezer area and a larger fridge. So the way we did our testing is we did one set of testing with the unit as one large refrigerator, and we did a second set of testing as a fridge freezer combo. And let me tell you, they were not consistent. That's probably the best way to put it. And I'm not sure why I've never seen this before on a review of Travoca, but it is something that you need to know. We did ours with an empty refrigerator. So we used a ThermoWorks smoke air temp probe connected to a beer can that we put in the big section of the refrigerator. And then we also put a pint mason jar of water. And we tested that with a ThermoPen 1 so that we had two sources of information on what the temperature was. By doing that, we didn't test how long it would take to get something cold. So in other words, we didn't load it up with warm beer and test how quickly it got the beer cold. And when we tested how long it stays cold, once we turn the power off, it did not have a thermal mass inside to help keep it cold. Now, I'm going to go through this data kind of fast. I'm going to try to put a graph up here so you can see what I'm talking about. So for the first test, we tested this in the refrigerator mode. And to cool this from our ambient 70 degrees down to 39 degrees, and 39 is important because you want your refrigerator, when you're keeping perishable items like ground meat and chicken and that sort of thing, below 40 degrees. And that's going to be important later on when I talk about that dark cloud. But the time it took to go from 70 to 39 was 59 minutes. That is the air temp. That doesn't mean if you put warm beer in here, it would be cold in that amount of time. But for the inside of the refrigerator to get that cold, that's how long it took. And once we turned the refrigerator off, it took 45 minutes to go from basically a 36.5 degrees to 41. So from a food safe temperature to a temperature outside of the food safety ratings. We also tested power consumption on this unit using our Bluetti EB70, which gives us a readout of the watts that it's providing. And using that EB70 on a full charge in refrigerator mode on max setting, it has max and an eco mode, this unit ran for 68 hours before the Bluetti gave us a red warning light that it was dying rapidly. Now that again is without a load in there. So that's how long it took. When we took the divider and put it back in, so we had a 2-zone, it took 30 minutes for it to go from 70 degrees to 39, so a bit quicker. I think there's some bleeding from the freezer side to the refrigerator side, which is fine, no problem. And once we plugged it into our Bluetti to see how long it would last using the colder freezer temperature, that took 42 hours basically to run the Bluetti dry. So it's using more power, even in eco mode, when it's using the freezer. When we had this cooled down to 29 degrees basically, and we turned the power off, it took 9 hours, again, an unloaded refrigerator, 9 hours to go from 29 degrees to 50. And we just used that random mark because that's the same mark that Expedition Portal used for their test. So roughly 540 minutes. Again, this was an empty fridge, no thermal load, so that is lower than you would see on the Expedition Portal tests, but those had a thermal load in them, so not apples and apples. There is, however, a culprit on why this or where this leaks, and I'll show you the infrared, is primarily, even though this has the vacuum insulated panels around it on the sides and the bottom, the lid apparently does not. And so we had thermal loss through the lid and through the latches. As you can see on our thermal load, both of those are leaking air. I think that a more insulated lid, this would have lasted longer. Now, from a power consumption, how did the Toshiba do? And actually it did really, really well. I did this power consumption using the watt output on my Bluetti, as well as the voltage input meter that's on the refrigerator itself. Going from 75 degrees to 32 degrees, when the compressor started up, it pulled 3.67 amps. When it's running, this consumed between 2.3 and 2.7 amps. So it's really, really an efficient compressor and refrigerator. What that means for you is if you have, like I have in the Grenadier or my EB70 Bluetti, both of those, well, the battery in the Grenadier is 100 amp hour flooded battery, and the Bluetti is a 700 watt, which I calculate to be right around 54 amp hour lithium ion battery. If you're running this on single fridge mode at 37 degrees, you're going to use about 0.8 amps per hour over your time frame, and that will give you roughly 2.8 days of runtime using either the battery or the Bluetti. If you are using it in dual mode, freezer and fridge, that's going to pull about 1.3 amps over the entire period, and that's going to give you about 1.7 days of runtime, just to give you an idea of kind of how long. Obviously, that's going to completely depend on what size of battery you have, whether you're running lithiums, so just use that as a data point. All right, let's talk about temperature accuracy, because it's very likely that you're going to be storing perishable items in this refrigerator. The temperature accuracy is going to either keep you safe or put you at risk. And this is probably the most important test of the entire review. And what am I talking about when I'm talking about temperature accuracy? I'm talking about, is the inside of the refrigerator the same temperature as the temperature reading on the display? That's critical. As you can imagine, you want to keep your food safe. So I did this again, both in fridge freezer mode and in refrigerator mode. And by the way, I did this test multiple times over multiple days. And actually, after working with Travoca on this issue, they sent me a second Rigel 35, and that did the same thing. So it wasn't a fluke, it wasn't a one-off. This seems to be a design parameter involving these, and I'll read you what Travoca's final answer was. But when you're in two-zone mode, refrigerator and freezer, you are getting pretty darn accurate readings on the screen. So I came within 1 degree generally of the refrigerator side of that reading. Generally, it was about a degree lower, actually, in the refrigerator than what it was reading on the screen. I didn't test the freezer side, but what I did do is I put a pint of water in the freezer side, and it actually froze, set at 14 degrees overnight, so it is definitely cold enough to freeze things and keep things frozen. And the way I tested the refrigerator side is I used my air probe. Then I pulled the pint of water out and I tested that with the ThermoPen 1, and we had consistency. So in dual zone mode, no problem. So as you can see, I'm not one that's just going to take the display and trust that it's right. I want to test it and make sure. And when I took the divider out and I went to use this in refrigerator mode, that is when the dark clouds started to gather. What was happening is that I would set this at 34 degrees, 35 degrees, whatever. And on the screen, very rapidly, the screen would show it at the set point. The problem is that my internal temperature probe, when this said 34 degrees, was still reading 50, right? So it might say 34 here, but it was not 34 inside the refrigerator. It was lagging and it wasn't accurate. Over time, setting overnight, the gauge would still say 34, but internal temperature of the refrigerator was 14 degrees higher. We were at 48, 49 degrees, and it wasn't getting any colder. And that was both the air temp and the water temp. Now, why is that important? Well, if you set this at 35 degrees and you throw your ground meat in there or your chicken and you take off for a week, right, your chicken and ground meat are not cold. They're not in the food safe zone, and they are subject to bacteria growth and everything else that goes with sort of non-properly refrigerated food. So it's critical that your food stays at the right temperature. And by looking at the gauge, that wasn't happening. So I sent a note to Travoca and I said, hey, I'm having this trouble. So after going through that first set of tests, they thought that perhaps the unit wasn't working correctly. They sent me a second refrigerator. I had the same issue with that, same inaccuracy in the refrigerator mode. And so I want to be clear, right? Travoca did send me these refrigerators at no cost, but that doesn't change what my thermometer told me. Travoca did work with me. We had a lot of conversations back and forth about what might be going on. As I mentioned, they sent me the second unit thinking maybe the first one wasn't right. After testing the second unit with the same issues, it seems to be part of the design of the refrigerator. They told me it's working as it should. So after all the communications back and forth and the testing, what I've gleaned is that Travoca puts their sensor in the wall of the unit, which makes sense. So they said, well, here, let me just read what they said. So thanks for your patience. Based on the video you provided, the temperature readings after accounting for temperature compensation match the factory settings. So that's the submenu in the screen. Therefore, the refrigerator is operating normally. So the way it's designed, the setting on the screen in refrigerator mode is not going to accurately show you the temperature on the inside. Regarding your observation that the temperature is not entirely precise in the single zone mode, That is due to the design logic of the refrigerator's precision temperature sensor. Sensor is mounted on the sidewall and measures the overall temperature of the unit. Since your testing method differs from the sensor's logic, I'm not sure how, I tested the temperature inside and I tested the temperature of the water inside, and again, after setting for 24 hours plus. Since your testing method differs from the sensor's logic, a temperature discrepancy of approximately 10 degrees may occur. You might try attaching the thermometer to the sidewall near the sensor to observe the readings. And I guess that's all fine and dandy, but I'm not sticking my food to the sidewall. My food is in the refrigerator. So to me, I mean, the answer is what the answer is. Basically, the logic is that in dual zone mode, it's accurate. In refrigerator mode, it doesn't seem to compensate correctly. So, you know, I think that is, it could put you at danger. You need to know it. Now, is there a solution? Well, yeah, there is. And all I did was turn this down to 22 degrees on the digital display. And sure enough, I was getting 36, 37 degrees in the refrigerator. So yeah, you can get around it. It's not a deal killer. But if you don't know it, if you trust the gauge, that's risky. So you need to turn it down much more than you think it should be. Does this completely discount Travoca for me? No, not really. I mean, it's a pretty big miss if you ask me. But I've not tested any other units. So maybe they're all like this. I can't tell you. So I'm not going to trash Travoca about that without having tested other units. So it may just be the standard methodology for all of these types of refrigerators. I'm going to try to get my hands on another one and test it to see if they're all like this. But what I would recommend is if you have a Travoca already, and again, this is the Rigel 35. Maybe the 25, maybe the 45, maybe the 60 are not the same. I don't know. But if you have the Travoca fridge and you are using it in single mode refrigerator configuration, I strongly recommend that you get a thermometer, either the remote thermometer like I had or just a refrigerator thermometer that you can throw in the unit. Just make sure you're at the temperature that you want to be at. There's a lot of other good things about the Travoca. So again, I'm fully intending on using this. I want to test it. I want to beat it up a bit, see how it performs. But I am going to make sure that I turn it down to 22 when I'm storing meat in the refrigerator. Now, if you're just storing beer, you know, it doesn't matter that much. But when you're storing perishable items, particularly meats and things like that, that can make you sick, you need to make sure that they're at the right temp. So anyway, I hope this has been beneficial. I hope you've learned something about the Travoca refrigerator and maybe all of these types of refrigerators. I hope you've learned that you can resolve it with a thermometer. And if you like seeing content like this, please take a moment to hit that sub button in the lower right-hand corner. Give us a thumbs up. Share this with your like-minded friends. As always, take care, and we'll see you outdoors.